Welcome to Horizons of Scripture, a biblical studies podcast with me, Elizabeth Corsar.
And me, Charlie Hadjiev.
Well, welcome back. We're delighted to have Manon with us today. Would you introduce yourself to us, please?
Well, obviously, I'm introducing myself to the people who watch this podcast and listen to this podcast because I know the two of you very well. But my name is Manon Ceridwen James, and I work as one of the deans here, running the ministerial training. And we work together quite closely on the BTH, don't we, all three of us? Yes, and I'm the canon theologian in Monmouth Diocese as well, in the cathedral in Newport, and various things on top of that.
So for our non-Anglican listeners, whether they're few or many, can you say what canon is? Because when I hear the word canon, I always think of those guns they used when they besieged cities. So are you like a spiritual gun for God, or is that a completely different meaning?
Yeah, well, no, I'm not a spiritual gun for God, no. So it's just the one N in the middle, C-A-N-O-N.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And I think a canon is an honorary title in a cathedral. So cathedrals have two types of canons. They have canons who run the cathedral. I'm not one of those. And they have honorary canons as well who contribute to the life of the diocese and the cathedral in other ways.
And we hear some rumors that apart from all the other things Manon is involved with, she's also a stand-up comedian. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm an actual stand-up comedian, but I have done about 8 or 9 sets now as a stand-up. It's something I'm trying to learn a little bit more about.
You're not on television yet, are you?
I'm not on television yet. Yes, I'm not on Live at the Apollo or anything like that, no.
I'm looking forward to it, because we haven't seen you. Are you any good?
I'm hilarious. I think I've shown a video to Elizabeth in the past.
I think I have seen a video,
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And I'll show you a video to Charlie, but I won't release the videos out into the wild, I'm afraid. Not yet, and not until I improve.
Yeah.
That's fine. But you're on the record now with the promise, so...
Yes.
And you'll have to give us a little bit of comedy in this podcast.
No pressure.
Which is partly why we're talking about humour in
Yes.
theology. So that combines your interests. So why are you interested in humour in theology at all?
Well, I just think that humour is such an important part of life. I think if we thought about it, we'd probably think that humour is one of the most important things in our lives. Not just in terms of entertainment, but in terms of how we as human beings relate to one another. You know, if you think about how many times you laugh during the day and why do you laugh, it's such an important part of life, isn't it? And
It kind of depends on what day you're having.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that's on one hand is universal, but on the other hand is quite culture specific.
Yes, so the people I've read would say that laughter is a part of the human condition. You know, everybody laughs, even children born, without being able to see, without being able to hear, they laugh. So laughter isn't something we learn, laughter is something we do. But what we laugh about is very culturally specific, and it's very, the different cultures have reputations for being funnier than others. And also, what we think is funny is different, and where the line is in what's offensive and what isn't offensive differs as well.
Yeah, it's a very tricky thing, isn't it? But I mean, a lot of people are fully convinced that God has no sense of humor whatsoever, right? Christianity is a very serious religion. There is no humor in the Bible. So what do you say? Why do we laugh if God doesn't?
So we know that God does laugh from the Bible, don't we, Charlie? You as a biblical scholar know this.
I might. I might.
If you read humour theorists, they will say that the Bible is one piece of evidence we have for the fact that laughter in the ancient world was seen as a derogatory thing. You laugh at people because you mock them, you look down at them. So laughter is seen as quite a negative thing, really. And there was this whole thing in the early church, John Chrysostom said that Jesus cried, but he didn't laugh. So there is a streak in Christianity which is a bit humourless, and unfortunately, because I don't think it helps anybody, but there is also a streak in Christianity which is actually full of humour and silliness. You think about the Easter laughter tradition in the German church, where it talks about the sort of topsy-turvy nature of the resurrection, for example. So there is a tradition, I'd love to see it, and I don't know if it's true, I've just read about it, that in some German churches on Easter Sunday you don't get a sermon, you just get jokes to provoke laughter. And in some traditions, churches meet on Easter Monday, again, with the same idea, telling each other rude jokes to make each other laugh, as this idea that the resurrection is God's laugh, God's last laugh kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So it's about the topsy-turvy nature of faith. And, you have the Holy Fools tradition, where I was even teaching yesterday about, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but, as a form of madness and as a form of humility, really, going around pretending to be mad or even being mad, who knows, throwing nets at the clergy, parading sausages rounds on feast days and this kind of thing, as a form of satire maybe on the church, and the church taking itself too seriously. I think we should perpetuate that Holy Fools tradition, actually.
So there is, basically what you're saying is there is, although it doesn't sound a very serious thing, there is a deep theological meaning to that as well.
Yeah, it's good, because Paul talks about, doesn't he, being fools for Christ, doesn't he, Elizabeth? I'm sure I'm right. So this idea that the foolishness of the cross. So there's a whole load of. It's not quite directly about humour, is it, in the Bible? But there is sort of a streak in Christianity which is countercultural, which is about satire, which is about even poking fun at religious hierarchies and this kind of thing, but also this idea that. Christianity is foolish in a way because it's about turning everything on its head.
So why is it a bad thing for the church to take itself too seriously, do you think?
I think it's a bad thing for anybody to take themselves too seriously, isn't it?
There's some people who are really serious, right?
Yes, and it's not great for the rest of us, is it?
That's true, I guess.
So I think, isn't Jesus' message about us loving others and being unselfish and loving other people as we love ourselves? Isn't that a message about not to put ourselves at the centre of everything? And I think if we put ourselves at the centre of everything, we become very serious. And in my work here, in training people for ordination, I try and say, don't take yourselves too seriously. The worst thing we could do is perpetuate this idea that we're very important, we're the centre of the world, and we should just be obsessed with all these trappings of Christianity, whereas actually I think the Christian message is the opposite of that.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I think it will be interesting maybe to explore a little bit the question whether or how humor appears in the Bible. You were saying something about Sarah early on. Right?
Yes, and as this is a biblical studies podcast, we probably ought to get to the biblical text.
Just mention the Bible.
Hey, I just mentioned the Bible there before, didn't I?
You did.
Yes, which we can get back to. We can move on to the New Testament. But it struck me the first instance of laughter we get in the Bible is in Genesis in chapter 18, where Sarah and Abraham, they're told that Sarah, in her advanced years is going to bear a child, and quite naturally she laughs at this idea. But her laugh is seen as being negative, as not trusting in God, and Sarah even then went so far as to deny that she had laughed because she was. We're told in the text that she was afraid of God. So the Bible, the first instance of laughter is a negative one, which doesn't set us in very good stead for. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It kind of seems to maybe go a little bit against your your thing, because she laughs, and then God is like, why did you laugh?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, no, I didn't laugh. And he says, yes, you did. But there is a continuation to that story, because 4 chapters later she gives birth to a son, and she calls him Isaac, or Abraham calls him Isaac. And what is interesting is that Isaac means he laughs. So it's exactly the same verb. When she laughs, the Hebrew verb is titzchak, and then Isaac is Itzhak. He laughs, she laughs. And so she seems to reinterpret the laughter there, and she says, everyone will laugh with me. So there is a kind of a dual nature to laughter.
Yes, absolutely.
On one hand, you laugh to ridicule or express your incongruity at something, but then there's also the laughter of joy, and so on. Yeah.
So does God laugh in the Hebrew Bible? Do we have instances where he's depicted as laughing?
I mean, there is this famous verse in Psalm 2 where it says the nations are rising up against God and his king, and then God will laugh at them. So it's again this idea of derogatory laughter.
Yeah.
He kind of ridicules. And there is another one in Exodus where it's kind of a slightly debated verse, but he makes fool of the Egyptians. So with all the plagues, he kind of seems to make fools of them, and laughs at them, and so on. So there is definitely this idea of derogatory laughter. I don't know what theologically we think about that, because I mean, is it good to laugh at people, put people down with laughter?
Well, there's a saying, isn't there, about punching up or punching down in having fun, joking about people. So I think it's fine to punch down, in a sense, isn't it? I mean punch up.
Punch up.
It's absolutely fine to punch up, but not punching down. So I think that the tradition that I'm talking about, the Holy Fools tradition, the kind of satire, actually making fun of the powerful and the powerless having a voice in that. I think it is part of the Christian tradition. There's a very important book by Jacqueline Bussey called Laughter of the Oppressed, and she makes that very point, really. It's about people being empowered by laughing at powerful people, really, and finding their own voice in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, so looking at it from a Bulgarian perspective, when I grew up during communist times, we had this culture of telling jokes. It's part of Bulgarian culture, but during communist times, there was this particular genre of jokes called political jokes. And it was quite a dangerous thing to do, because sometimes people could even go to prison for telling but there were political jokes about the Communist Party and about the police. So these were kind of the two main subsections. And it was a way of a way of political resistance, if you like, or you laugh at the system because there's nothing else you can do.
Which is her argument, actually, I think.
But can God ever punch up?
That was going to be my question. Is God not punching down?
Well, no. God can't punch up. No.
So you're saying it's fine to punch down, not to punch up, but God does it.
But does God tell jokes? I don't think does God tell jokes in that sense? I don't think so.
Does Jesus?
Perhaps, depending how we interpret some of his parables. And
there is this one about the camel. So a camel can more easily go through a needle's eye than a rich person enter the kingdom of God. So that is, I think, meant to be a hilarious image. But I think even I would maybe disagree even with the fact that God can't punch up. I think he can, because...
Who's he punching then? Or who's God punching?
I think people in power.
Are they in power over God?
Well, this is, I think, where our theology sometimes does us disservice, because we think of God always in masculine terms as a warrior and king, which are metaphors of power, and that's a very important part of tradition. But the Bible also has another side that we don't. I mean, I remember we were talking a few months ago about a book called Mourner. What was it? Mourner, Mother, Midwife. Which explores some of the female metaphors or images of God in the Bible that emphasize a different way of thinking about God. And I think especially with the incarnation, when God comes into the human condition and becomes a human being, he is not just in power, but he is also powerless. I mean, the cross is the ultimate place of powerlessness, if you like. So when you think of God in that sense, and God with his people God identifies with his people who are powerless and persecuted and traumatized, then in that condition, God, I think, can punch up. So even with God, laughter and humor can be a way of resistance to human power and oppression.
Yeah, so I like that. So the thing is, this is a theology podcast, isn't it? It's a biblical studies podcast, but for the St. Padarn's Institute. So for my day job, not my theological research, it feels as though I'm very much part of a structure, and I have to call God he and this kind of thing. Whereas as a theology podcast, I'm very excited about ideas about who is God? How do we talk about God? We even had this conversation, didn't we, a couple of months ago, where I'd come across Thomas Oord's work, and he talked about how we mistranslate Almighty God, and Almighty, the word for Almighty, El Shaddai, isn't it, actually means God of the breasts. And I was reading this, I was thinking, why am I saying Almighty God when the translation is God of the breasts? So I came to you, didn't I, and I said, Charlie, what's this I'm reading?
It could be. I mean, the truth is, Shaddai is like, people wonder, well, what does it mean? So
does it mean mountain? Does it mean mountain?
I think that's one of the most,
Yes, but Almighty God is such a part of our DNA in the church, isn't it? That to even think that it could be even a feminine way of looking at God and not all-powerful blows our mind, isn't it? So I like what you were saying, actually, and I've been reading this book. I've only started it. Graham Adams, God the Child. So I think it's difficult though, isn't it? Because in the church, you see, and especially those of us who work every day for the church, we're just so used to this idea of everything being in its place, God at the top, us sort of in the middle kind of thing, and creation, animals and stuff being at the bottom. But if we completely threw all our ideas about Almighty God out and saw God in a different way, it's a completely new way of being, isn't it, in the church? Let alone in life. Yeah,
but does it make any difference to pastoral ministry, you think? In terms so laughter, you can think about God and laughter and the theological aspects of it, which, especially in situations of oppression, seem to be important. Are there any other situations, do you think, when laughter could be an important part of spiritual growth, ministry, dealing with life?
Well, one of the things I found as being a parish priest, because I've been ordained in the Church in Wales now about 30 years, and for, I suppose, 22 of those years I've been, involved in parish ministry on the ground kind of thing. And I suppose the thing that surprised me most was about funeral ministry being full of laughter, and that shocked me to begin with, because, I'd been brought up, in a little Welsh village where you close the curtains, for hearse goes by and everything's about mourning and this kind of thing. And to actually find that the times that I could make congregations laugh was in telling stories about the deceased in a funeral. But that shouldn't be surprising, really, because it's like crying, isn't it? Laughing is like crying. It's a form of catharsis, isn't it? So I actually found that people preferred me not being this dour kind of person who was very serious, but actually wanted a lighter touch. They didn't want misery, because what they were facing was difficult enough. And I would find that people would even tell me funny stories when I would go and visit them dealing with a funeral.
Do you have any of those stories?
Well, yes. So something I shared with you is a chapter that's about to be published in a book about humour and pastoral care, and in it, so I've changed the names of the people involved, but in it I tell the story of when I went to visit this person. I didn't actually know her at all, but I got this phone call to go and visit somebody whose husband had just died, and we had a nice, polite meeting. I took down details about the husband and what kind of funeral she wanted for him and everything. And as I was about to walk out of the door, she kind of called me back in and she wanted to show me something. And it was a card that she'd received, but the card was addressed to her husband, commiserating with her husband as she had died.
Oh, gosh.
And she was new to the area, so I don't think she had many friends. And she was desperate to tell this story, because she found it funny. Mm-hmm. And then we were both laughing. Well, she can't really ring the people up, can she, and say, "Oh, hi, I'm actually alive."
I have reason.
Yes.
I know, you'd have another funeral to go and do that.
But that's just one story. I would find that kind of thing happened quite a lot, really. Not just people wanting to tell me funny stories about what the deceased person had said, but actually funny stories about the whole process of grief, really. And as I said, I think laughter, like crying, is a form of catharsis as much as everything else. So even though we've been talking about laughter here as, is it either good or bad? Well, there are lots of different forms of laughter, aren't there, really?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Well, which kind of brings us to another aspect of this whole topic. So we alluded, I guess, with our Sarah story to the fact that there are two different sides. You can laugh at someone or you can laugh with someone. So laughter can be good, but sometimes it can also be quite bad, especially, well, if you take yourself too seriously always, but even if you don't take yourself seriously, sometimes it can be quite hurtful if people laugh at you. You've shared how you don't like people making jokes about the Welsh language, for example, or about other things that you kind of find offensive. So, yeah, I mean, where is the line, do you think?
So I think jokes are about policing where the line's at, and also about establishing norms. So what's acceptable and what is unacceptable. So yes, so I've shared with you a journal article that I've written that hopefully will be published soon, and it's about Welsh contextual theology, and there's a section in that is anti-Welsh bigotry, the last form of acceptable racism or something like that. So it's not so bad now. But up until about 2 or 3 years ago, almost every day you'd find in the newspapers jokes about the Welsh language. So it's about, I think it's about othering, it's about establishing norms, it's about othering Welsh and making English the dominant language. So things like, a cat walked on my typewriter,
keyboard.
I don't know why I said typewriter.
You were born long after typewriters were gone, right?
Well, I do remember though.
Oh no, I can't believe that.
No, a cat walked on my keyboard, and it came out with Welsh and that kind of thing. So the humour in it is that Welsh is indecipherable, but Welsh isn't indecipherable. Any language you don't speak is indecipherable because you don't speak it. So it's trying to make English as norm, Welsh as other. So in some ways, if you get lots of jokes like that all the time, and the other joke is that Welsh doesn't have any vowels, or Welsh has more vowels than English. So it's just if it's just a constant stream, then it just makes Welsh people feel belittled, and that in the UK context, nobody takes our language seriously. So it is a form of keeping people in their place, isn't it? And I suppose racist jokes would be that as well, isn't it? It's like reinforcing stereotypes. So even if, so actually, obviously it's wrong to, well, with racist jokes, obviously there are some jokes that imply racism, but they're not necessarily offensive. So, you know, it depends if you're making a joke against, you know, a majority group or whatever. Well, that's not necessarily offensive because you're punching, I get this wrong, up, not punching down, aren't you? But if your racist jokes are just reinforcing unhelpful stereotypes, then obviously that's wrong, isn't it?
Misogynistic jokes? I mean, I bristle at the thought of when I grew up, you know, misogynistic jokes were...
What would you tell misogynistic jokes?
I would have in the past, yes. No, not now. It's because in the past those things were kind of normal and people will tell them, and you grow up in this culture and you never think twice about it. And then I suppose with time, as you begin to understand other people and you understand what jokes are doing to them, you begin to feel repulsion, but you can't really change your past, unfortunately. Yeah, so what used to be funny before is not funny anymore.
No. Would you like us to absolve you of your misogynistic jokes in the past?
Do you have the power to do that?
I have.
Thank you very much. I feel better now. But I mean, it does also point to the fact that humor is a very cultural thing as well. You talked about it being universal, which it is, but it's also very cultural.
And I think this is an interesting point you make, because we're reading the biblical text, but it's not a contemporary text. It's an ancient text, you know, written over many, many centuries. And yeah, there's episodes in the text that we today perhaps don't find funny at all, but in their original context were intended to be funny for the audience. So.
Yeah, exactly. I was telling you about this story in Judges, which is I don't think we ever read about this woman who kills a Canaanite general, and it's full of sexual innuendo, and she kills him and kind of deprives him of his masculinity. So we read it without really appreciating a lot of that stuff, but it was meant to be funny within that context. And again, I'm amazed at how often we come back to this idea of punching up and down, because in that context, the Israelites were oppressed by the Canaanites. So making fun of the Canaanite general, you know, he is this powerful man, and now he's no longer powerful, and he's no longer a man, and he's dead. And that's really all very funny to us, is a way of resistance. But you're right, we read it and we don't appreciate it because it is from a completely different cultural setting.
So the one joke that I think is in the Bible which completely is Welsh and feels very Welsh is in John 1 about, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So who is it? Is it Nathaniel says that? I can't quite remember.
Let me just pull it up.
It's Nathaniel who says it, isn't it? About who? About
Jesus.
About Jesus.
Yeah.
Do you want to read it?
Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him about whom Moses and the law and the prophets wrote. Nathanael said to him, can anything good come out of Nazareth?
You see, I always laugh when I hear that, because I could well imagine somebody from the Llyn Peninsula saying that about somebody from Anglesey. That is a proper Welsh joke, that is. Or about somebody from Cardiff or something like that.
So why? Can you explain a bit more? I know once you explain the joke, you have completely killed it.
Well, I quite like the fact that Jesus comes from the north, okay? From a rural backwater, you know, that for me feels very affirming that, you know, this is where Jesus came from. But in Wales, we make fun of each other coming from different parts of Wales, and it's part of the humour. So I can well imagine that, you know, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's meant to be affectionate, isn't it? This can't be the... And also, it's the same thing, isn't it, when people were saying after Jesus preached, wasn't it? Well, who is this guy? You know, we know his mother, we know his brothers and sisters, you know, and all of a sudden he's this great kind of preacher man. we can identify with that kind of, well, who is he? Why are they saying these things about him? That he's the Son of God, or he's this great preacher, or whatever they're saying. And that just feels very, we would say that about somebody. Who does he think he is? We would say that, wouldn't we, in our cultures? Mm-hmm. But you say, Charlie, that different cultures have different sense of humour. I think we share a sense of humour in a way, don't we? We find similar things funny, don't we?
I think so, yes. It is very tricky moving from culture to culture.
Is it?
Yeah. I don't know whether Welsh and Bulgarian humour maybe share things in common.
So what's about Northern Ireland?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Did you make jokes when you were working in Northern Ireland?
I always make jokes. Sometimes people laugh and sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they laugh with you, sometimes it's at you.
That's correct, yes. I suppose I can't help myself, but that's what. But it's interesting. I have tried, so it's especially British and Bulgarian humor.
Yeah.
That doesn't translate, Sometimes
Really?
I say Bulgarian jokes to in a British context, and people are like, "Oh, what's so funny about it?" And the other way around. I mean, the dry English humor doesn't really translate into Bulgarian very much.
Perhaps because it's not funny.
Oh, there you go. What about Scottish humor? Do Scots have a separate sense of humor? Or?
I mean, the Scots are just always thought to be very dour people, so I think we probably are deemed not to have a sense of humour at all. But I like to pride myself on having a good sense of humour.
That's why you moved to Wales.
Absolutely.
You see, so the jokes we're making now, they're sort of racist in the way, aren't they? But they're not punching down.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh no.
But they're not punching down.
No, and we're making fun of ourselves. though.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can make fun of yourself, can't you?
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yes.
Yes.
I suppose. I mean, and here we come back again to the theological usefulness of humor, because making fun at yourself is a way of, I guess, on one hand, showing strength and also humility. Because if you can laugh at yourself, then that means you are not really putting yourself above other people.
And I think an important part of the Christian life is building community, isn't it? And having shared jokes, I think, is an important part of building good relationships and community. I would argue, anyway.
So I think we've established that God has a sense of humor, and
Clear.
And I think certainly Jesus does, because I'm just thinking, talking about funeral ministry and sort of in those times when it's not humour, maybe we think it shouldn't be there, or but we do find, and I'm thinking when Jesus is on trial, and it's the Roman trial, Pilate says, are you the Son of God? Or and Jesus is like, well, if you say so, or there's different iterations of it in the different Gospels. But Jesus is making fun of Pilate. Pilate really doesn't know what's going on, and Jesus is making fun of him in his response. So it is an interesting, like a time where Jesus really, you wouldn't expect him to be making a joke about his trial, his sort of upcoming death. He messes with Pilate and is like, well, you actually don't know what's going on, but I'm going to sort of tease you in my responses to you. So,
because I think we think of Jesus as this very holy, serene person.
Yeah.
But actually, he was quite a sarcastic, angry person, wasn't he, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see that with the Jewish authorities, don't we? When he's sort of debating with them all the time, he is kind of mocking them.
And like we think of sarcasm as the lowest form of wit, but that's what we get a lot with Jesus, I think.
Yeah. And here again, he's punching up.
Yeah.
Going back to our discussion about God and, can God have... is Welsh a sarcastic culture?
No, I think it's more affectionate and sarcastic, I think, yes. It's not dry, you see. It's people like to kind of, it's this sort of mocking, but people like to tease each other, and that's how people relate to one another. So if I just remember, if I was going shopping with my parents when I was a child, and we'd go to Llandudno, say to Marks and Spencer's, which was like the big treat, on a Saturday. The whole day would be kind of my father just sidling up to people and making a witty remark to somebody that he would know, and then they'd all laugh, and then he would walk off again, and I would see other people doing that, so people tease each other all the time. So
this is where you started your stand-up.
Well, exactly. We know now.
So it's been really great to have you, Manon.
We've had a good laugh.
We've had a good laugh, yes, and I think also we've teased some very important and interesting topics. I actually, much as I like humor, and much as I'm convinced that God has a great sense of humor, I haven't thought about it in all these different aspects systematically. So it's good to kind of think through these issues with you.
And I suppose one avenue we haven't been down, but it's something perhaps the listeners or watchers may be able to think about, is laughter as a form of joy, isn't it? So Psalm 126 talks about laughter as joy more, doesn't it? So I think, doesn't it?
That's true, yes.
So there is that aspect which I really do think that Christians need to recover, that sense of joy, because people who are not Christians think of us as very dour, miserable people, but actually we should be joyful people. Yeah,
and I suppose you can't really feel joy unless you laugh. I mean, the joy and laughter are in a way inseparable, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So an important spiritual discipline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to add it to all the other spiritual disciplines.
Indeed.
Maybe you need to think about your formation courses and add one or two bits there, huh?
Well, we do have quite a lot of humour on our Formation for License Ministry programme, don't we, Elizabeth?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Manon. It's been really great. I like humour always, but it's been good to kind of think about it from all these different angles and aspects, and its light side, but also its more serious and important aspect. So I've learned a lot. Thank you. And you mentioned an article that you have done, right?
Yes. So I've got a chapter coming out in a book soon, and the chapter's called Humour, Theology and Pastoral Care. I've forgotten the name of the book, I'm afraid, but it's an edited collection, all chapters responding to the work of the pastoral theologian and practical theologian Stephen Patson. But perhaps we can add the title of the book to the notes.
We'll put the notes and look forward to reading it.
Thank you. It's just gone to the publishers now to actually be printed, so hopefully it'll be out soon.
Very good.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and watch out for future episodes.
If you're interested in theology, why not visit the St. Padarn's Institute website and check out our programs.